Okay, so you've gotten your homestead check back and we've told you that you forgot to file for an exemption that you were eligible for. So this is the video to sort of explain to you what that means and what you need to do about it. So what are exemptions? Exemptions are amounts of money that you are essentially given against the assessed value of your property, and it's that much less that you have to pay taxes on. The exemption that most people know about with respect to homestead is what we call the standard exemption, and it's $50,000 off of the assessed value, which saves you about $1,000 a year on your property taxes, depending on the total property tax rate for where you live. So that $50,000 applies as long as your home is worth at least $75,000. If it's worth less than $75,000, then the exemption is less by the amount that it's below $75,000 down to $25,000. So if your home's only worth $50,000, you get a $25,000 exemption, and then you get it incrementally up to the total $50,000 if your home's worth $75,000, and then for any home that's worth more than $75,000, everybody gets the $50,000 exemption. So if you forget to file for a homestead, the thing that you get hit with right off the bat is you're losing that $1,000 a year savings on your property taxes, as well as the cap each year on how much your assessed value can go up. But there are many, many other exemptions. There's three broad categories of exemptions. One is exemptions that are available to certain persons for their stage of life that they're in. Others, the broad category is there are exemptions for various disabilities. And then the third is exemptions that pertain to veterans and first responders. So just a quick overview, there are exemptions if you are a widow or widower and you have not been remarried. There are exemptions if you are blind. There are exemptions if you are a quadriplegic. There are exemptions if you are a paraplegic, a hemiplegic, if you have a total and permanent disability and you are required to use a wheelchair to get around, or you are legally blind. There are many exemptions for veterans. There are exemptions for veterans, the surviving spouses of veterans as well. So if you're a veteran, if you are a surviving spouse of a service member who died from a combat-related incident while in the line of duty, you are eligible for an exemption. If you're a military veteran and you have a combat-related disability, there are certain exemptions that are for disabilities that are total and permanent, and there are exemptions for disabilities for military service that are total disability but not necessarily permanent. The list goes on, and the best way to make sure that you have not missed an exemption that you were eligible for is to simply have ordered a homestead check, because the way we walk you through the questions, we make sure that there's no way that you have missed an exemption. One of the most common ones that we run across that involves a lot of money is that's quite often missed is deployed service members. If you're a service member who was deployed outside the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, and you were deployed in the previous year on certain military operations that are approved, it's all the major military operations, then basically you get the percentage off your property taxes for the percentage of the year that you were deployed. There are also exemptions for first responders. If a first responder dies in the line of duty, basically their surviving spouse is exempt from having to pay any property tax. If a first responder is permanently and totally disabled in the line of duty, there's an exemption. So there's a whole world of exemptions out there, and you want to make sure you don't miss them. It's kind of like a treasure hunt trying to figure it out if you try and do it through the property appraiser's offices, because they have pamphlets on it, they have information on their websites, but you really have to look hard to find exemptions that you may be eligible for. The DR 501 form that everyone has to file a homestead application has a really short list of check marks that you can check if you feel that you're eligible for exemptions. And some exemptions they're not really worth a lot of money. There's a few of them that it's $500 off the value of your property taxes. That's going to save you like $10 a year on your property taxes. But there's other exemptions that are much larger. And there are exemptions that, like we mentioned earlier, can be a percentage of your property taxes. And there are some exemptions that are a complete and total exemption from having to pay property taxes. For example, there's one if you're a senior and you've lived in your home for over 25 years and your home is valued at less than $250,000, you can be completely exempt from having to pay any property taxes. Now that last one is an example of an exemption that doesn't necessarily apply everywhere. Basically, the Department of Revenue has said that the senior exemption that I just mentioned, and then there's another senior exemption that you're over 65, and it's your homestead, that those two have to be adopted by local ordinance. So those two senior exemptions may or may not be eligible for the county or the municipality that you're in. And some of them, the county may have adopted it, but the municipality didn't for those two over 65 low-income senior exemptions. I mentioned low income. There's quite a few of exemptions that you don't get that exemption if you make too much money. So the Department of Revenue set a certain amount of money. I think it was $20,000 as of 2000, and it's adjusted for inflation each year. I think that the income limit now is somewhere just under $30,000, that if you have income below that, you're eligible for several of these exemptions. But if you have income above it, you're not. And then again, sometimes you can lose the exemption. For example, if you're a surviving spouse of a first responder or veteran or military member who died in combat and you get remarried, you would lose that exemption. So the best way, again, to make sure that you don't miss an exemption is just to file a homestead check, just to order a homestead check, and then you'll know that you didn't miss one, rather than having to hit or miss, going through pamphlets, going to different websites, trying to figure it out. So congratulations that you got your homestead check and you've been notified about this exemption. The good news is now all you have to do is go down to your property appraiser's office and tell them that you forgot to file for an exemption that you were eligible for, and that you want to file a new DR 501 to get that exemption. And some exemptions you need to ask about it. Some of them you can go back and get a refund retroactively of the extra property taxes that you paid for as far as 4 years back. So be sure and ask about that when you go down and file your form for the exemption that you missed. So contact your county property appraiser's office, tell them you forgot to file for an exemption. Your homestead check will have all the information on it, what the exemption was, and we'll also tell you what additional forms you need to file. Sometimes you're going to need a letter from the Veterans Administration. Sometimes there's a form that a doctor has to fill out. There's a whole range of forms, but we make them all available to you, and we'll tell you on your homestead check which forms you'll need for your particular exemption that you missed.